Hello and welcome everyone to this LinkedIn Live on Clinical Operations 2025, Navigating Market Sentiment and Provider Engagement. Thanks for those of you who've joined us. We'll give everyone maybe a couple of minutes before we actually start with the LinkedIn Live. In the meantime, that we have some fun activity planned for all of you, right? Uh, so let's do this. This is something that we did on a previous LinkedIn Live as well, and which was very well received. So Nisarg and Vandana, I'll ask each of you what is your favorite recent TV series that you've watched. So Vandana, since this is your first LinkedIn Live, why don't we put you on the spot and start with you?
Sure, Chunky. So, not on Netflix, but I think the recent series which I watched was Shaker Holmes. It's basically an Indian copy version of Sherlock Holmes. So, honestly, it's not that great, but I would say they've done some good work with the Indian touch, Indian feels, Bollywood, and all that. So, I really liked it. Something I would recommend to, watch out as you guys have some free time.
Great. Nisarg, what's your recommendation?
I'm watching Modern Family for the first time on Disney Plus. So I'm really liking the character Cam. So it's definitely light-hearted comedy. So I would definitely recommend it to everyone. But what about you, Chunky?
So I have a toddler, so I'm behind on watching a lot of series. So I've only been watching the ones that I know I like. So the recent one that I watched was Drive to Survive. So I don't get to watch a lot of sports now. So that's one way I try to keep in touch. And I like
Would
Formula One
you
and I like that series. So
you'd be watching a lot of Baby Shark series or videos anyways, right?
thankfully, no.
Not
Okay,
yet.
so I think we are 2 minutes in, and for those of you who joined in, let us know if you have any recommendations for a series that we should go and watch after this LinkedIn Live is over. Let us know in the chat. Once again, welcome everyone to this LinkedIn Live on Clinical Operations 2025, Navigating Market Sentiment and Provider Engagement. Uh, in this LinkedIn Live, we are going to talk about how 2024 has been for the overall industry, and we'll also talk about what are our expectations from 2025. And if there is something that you want to share on, like for the audience, if there's something that you want to share on what you expect for 2025, let us know. Let us know what is your top prediction for 2025 in the chat, and we'll touch on those as well and see how many of those end up being in our list. With that being said, let me introduce the three of us. So I'm Chunky Satija. I'm a vice president with Everest Group, part of our healthcare and life sciences service line, and look after the life sciences cluster. And with me, I have Nisarg and Vandana, who are our two clinical and R&D experts. Between them, they cover everything in clinical and R&D uh, from services to technology, from CROs to IT service providers to pharma companies, right? So, and I'll 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 be asking both of them a lot of questions around what they are seeing in 2024 and what they expect from 2025. So let's begin, and let's start with how this year has been for the pharma industry, right? So once again, Vandana, welcome to your first LinkedIn Live. We'll put you on the spot straight away. So why don't you talk to us about what were your reflections from 2024? How was this year for the global pharma industry?
Yeah, Chunky. I think I'll be put on spot a lot on this one. But anyways, I feel that 2024 has been very an eventful year of pharma, as the traditional resilience is being tested, and we continue to see daily news, press releases, or what's in store. A lot of cost containment initiatives and focus on top line growth have been the significant things that we're hearing. But if I have to list down, I mean, couple of trends or probably the market scenarios, I would want to focus on the increased focus on ROI. This is because there's a rising S&G and R&D expenses. So also executives have become a lot more focused on ROI. has put a lot more pressure on vendor management and procurement leaders as well for better price negotiations. Secondly, R&D activity decline is also something that we saw in 2024. Though there's a strong drug pipeline with increased focus on oncology, rare diseases, especially with the latest success of GLP-1 and diabetes and Alzheimer's drug. But overall, the number of trials starts have delayed and they're slightly catching up to the 2019 levels. Of course, some of this can be attributed to the COVID-19 backlog and delays in next-gen vaccine trials and all. But I would say the limited funding availability for the startup ecosystem was also an influential factor. Apart from that, I would also want to call out IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Because of that, there has been increased rates globally. I know there has been recent rate cut by by FDA, by federals. But at the same time, under IRA, a lot of medicines, widely used medicines, they are seeing lowered prices. Now, this has forced pharma to redefine the therapeutic areas, pushing them to rethink that what should be the strategy to offset the revenue loss and also to maintain the essential medicines. And lastly, I would want to point out portfolio rebalancing. And this is something that I think we keep on hearing almost every day these days. I mean, a few days only I read J&J's article that they are pulling out of the dengue vaccine due to account reprioritization of infectious diseases. But also, from our engagement with CROs, we've heard that there's an uptick of clinical trial cancellations from large pharma, which is, of course, largely attributed to reprioritization of programs, competitive pressures, and, of course, poor data from trials. So these are the couple of things which I have been hearing. But yeah, looking forward to what do you think about that? And of course, Nisarg, what would you want to say on this?
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with what you mentioned. I think restructuring is clearly one of the things that we are seeing a lot, as well as I think the other thing that you mentioned around focus on ROI. I think that is clearly something which is coming out in a lot of conversations. I'm also seeing a lot of it in deal activity as well, where again a lot of deal activity, like at least based on what I'm seeing, is uh, not at the pace at what was expected. So it's a bit slower than generally what we would have predicted at the start of the year. Nisarg, anything that like you would want to add on top of that?
No, I think these have been largely the conversations which also I have seen when I was at SCDM a couple of weeks ago. It was one of the recurring conversations, right? Where are a lot of the deals being or deals happening, or where should we focus on what should our messaging be around? So a lot of it is around ROI, productivity, how to focus on costs, reducing costs, and so on. So completely aligned to what Vandana mentioned.
Okay, so let's also now talk about what we are seeing from the supply side, right? So, Nisar, why don't you kick us off, right? Generally, what are you seeing from product provider perspective, from a services perspective?
Definitely. So, just a quick orientation for the audience over here, right? The graph which you see over here is YOY constant currency growth for various providers whose earnings have been plotted against like growth rates on the y-axis and quarterly earnings on the x-axis. So, if you think about it, right? 2024 has cannot match really the 2021, the immense growth earnings which everyone saw in 21. But what we're seeing is there is muted deal activity in a lot of the quarters. So if I divert your attention to the green line, which really talks about the healthcare and life sciences IT service providers, there you will see that the growth was actually degrowing for a few quarters, and it was a difficult year. Although healthcare and life sciences, if you contrast this to all the other industries, it's still an industry which has been resilient. Where providers have been able to grow at like 4 to 5% growth rates YOY. But what I really saw for healthcare life sciences IT service providers was a lack of large deals, which they usually look forward to in any industry. And the second is the threat of deal consolidation and provider consolidation. So therefore, a lot of the activity was focused on how can we reduce costs, how can we get more ROI out of spending, and so on, which impacted a few providers and which elevated or extended the deal cycle for a lot of them. I think for the product providers, right? Not a lot of product providers are listed, to be honest, but you might have seen a similar growth trajectory, in the sense products were still a little better off than IT service specialists. And the reason was, a lot of the product providers were able to pivot to the mandate on cost and ROI productivity very soon. There were still instances of, say, farmers thinking about build versus buy, which may have impacted a few products who are focused on the data and analytics space. But over and above that, we've seen a couple of products really incorporating AI or generative AI use cases for better efficiency, better productivity, and working at lower total cost of ownership, which help them have a slightly better year compared to the others. But still, if you look at the base comparable to 24 compared to, say, 2023, 2022, it was slightly on the lower side as well.
Thanks, Nisarg. And I think your point around healthcare and life sciences IT services is spot on. I think it's just in the last few days, the conversations that I've had on it, I think it generally seems that the growth has been sluggish and slower than what we expected at the start of the year. And I think you also mentioned this. There's this interestingly, I think the pipeline for these service providers is very strong. So they are everyone's saying that the pipeline is very strong, but their deals aren't getting converted, and even the ones which are getting converted are significantly smaller than what they would like. Interesting, I think, take on the products as well. It's, I think, interesting to see that there's such a significant delta in growth between products and like healthcare and IT services and even R&D services. So maybe let's switch to R&D services. And Vandana, generally, from a CRO perspective, what is it that you have seen?
Yeah, Chunky, I think a couple of things Nisarg already mentioned, but would want to reiterate the part in the preclinical. So, besides my interactions with the industry, be it enterprise or the provider side, emerging biotechs, specifically startups in the preclinical early R&D phase, they are seeing tougher markets due to priority reset towards profitable growth across the industry. This is impacting deal activity in preclinical, and the CROs are also largely focused on strategic partnership with large pharma for revenue continuity. And also, the funding activity seems to be fairly competitive in this space. As I was listening to the recent IQVIA earnings call, so they also mentioned that per World Value Report, the biotech funding for the 2024 first half has been like $70 billion, which is equivalent to the entire 2023 numbers, which of course is good news. But a lot of focus has been on phase 3, phase 4 clinical trial assets that can realize revenue faster rather than the initial drug discovery stage. Another interesting thing which I'm hearing is the pivot towards FSP versus an FSO model. FSP, basically a functional service provider model, versus an FSO is a full service outsourcing model, is gaining a lot more traction, which is becoming increasingly critical for procurement leaders. Specifically within that, on-time delivery, breadth, and depth of expertise, along with partnership and affiliate networks, have proven to be extremely helpful in the FSP model. And lastly, I would want to call out the significant focus on domain and therapeutic area expertise. I believe this is not something which is new. I think we have been telling this to the service providers, but lately in the discussions with enterprises, there has been deep focus on therapeutic and domain expertise, which has become really critical given the pipeline is heavily dependent on precision medicine rare diseases, cell and gene therapy, which by nature is expected to have complex trials versus the earlier ones. So, yeah, I would say these are the things which service providers need to be cautious of from an impact standpoint.
Thanks, Vandana, and thanks both of you. I think you made some good points on like generally what we are seeing across pharma, across the different types of suppliers. I wanted to pick on a few things that both of you mentioned, and I wanted to see if we can deep dive on both on some of those aspects. So, Nisarg, one of the things that you mentioned was around build versus buy, and I think this comes up a lot. And as you mentioned, I think data and analytics is one area where it comes out more. But like even if you think about some of the applications that are used within clinical, right? Even something like a CTMS, there are a lot of homegrown solutions. There are a lot of solutions built up on a Salesforce platform or a hyperscaler platform, right? So there's clearly different ways in which organizations approach this. We've also seen organizations create their own technology, spin it off as a separate company, right? And at the same time, we see Viva having such a dominant time in the market, right? So there's clearly very contrasting approaches that a lot of these pharma companies are taking. Can you like shed more light on how you see this build versus buy and bring
Yeah.
out some of the nuances on where you see what you see and why
Hmm.
you see it?
Yeah. So definitely, I think build versus buy is a conversation which seems to have accelerated the last 12 months or so. And it's happening a lot in the data and analytics space for sure. There are specific applications within the transactional areas like EDC, CTMS, RTSM, etc., where there could be a pharma could potentially take a build approach, but largely for example, what you mentioned in the CTMS space. But largely, what we have seen is that farmers don't really want to rebuild something which already exists in the market. Therefore, a lot of the build activity is focused on the data management, the data aggregation, the data analytics and insights layers, wherein a farmer could have an existing data lake, a data warehouse, maybe a customized solution built on top of a Snowflake or a Cloudera, where they could ideally take this build approach. Now, I think it's important to understand where the industry, various parts of the industry converge over here, right? So there are the hyperscalers who really have horizontal capabilities, they don't have the domain nuance. So pharma companies will either look at in-house capabilities to develop these, or they will partner with an IT service provider who can help them build out a particular section of the module for a data management, data analytics, and so on. So build, operate, transfer is ideally what's happening through a IT service provider plus hyperscaler collaboration. What's also happening is product providers also have a couple of their own solutions, homegrown solutions, right? So of course they're not really enjoying it when a pharma or particularly a large pharma thinks about the build versus buy approach. But I think this is how the industry seems to be converging. A lot of the large pharmas are thinking about build versus buy in areas which are strategic to them, where they want to have more data in-house. They want to have more control over the data governance and so on. The SMP pharmas aren't really taking the build approach; they're taking the buy approach because, to be honest, building a application or a solution takes multiple or resources and also a lot of time and money, right? So if you don't really have a product thinking mindset, very soon you could be looking at a solution which is legacy or which might not really be truly integrated with the other solutions in your environment. So that's the conundrum. I don't think the industry has converged to either a build or a buy. There are a lot of build and buy conversations as well, which are happening.
Interesting point, Nisarg, and I think a good point on large pharma versus SMB. Uh, and I think generally this has been my experience as well because a lot of SMBs don't have the kind of funds to, or not funds, but not have the kind of resources to invest in building their own solutions. And the other thing that I've seen is, I think generally I've seen the product and platform industry mature a lot more in the last few years. I remember a lot of, if you look at lot of large pharma, the reason they've built in-house solutions is because there was not really anything which was available. And I think RBQM is a very good example. You will see a lot of large pharma who would have built a lot of their own homegrown solutions a few years before where providers had, right? And I know that this is RBQM is one area where I'm sure you are seeing a lot of new solutions come in from data and analytics providers, but RBQM has been there for a decade, and a lot of large pharma have built their own solutions for it. So I think that's another thing that I'm seeing is because I think the product and provider industry wasn't as mature a few years ago that it is now. That's why also a lot of these large pharma took the build route versus the buy route.
Yeah, I think maybe just a summary or a statement to summarize this thinking is what farmers are thinking about build versus buy is build for differentiation and buy for parity. This actually came up from one of my colleagues in the SCDM conference I met, and I think it's a really nice way to summarize it.
That's good. I'll use it in my conversations
Yeah,
as well.
of course.
With credits, of course. Okay, I think Vandana is back. So Vandana, I think I also wanted to touch on one of the things that you mentioned around FSP and FSO, and I know that generally we are seeing even for CROs, we've seen and we've heard from a lot of CROs that they're seeing FSP growing faster than FSO. We've seen them make more investments in scaling up their FSP business. I think similarly, we've also heard from a lot of IT and business process service providers on how they are trying to uh, they're trying to get more into some of the areas where traditionally a CRO has a stronger play. So I was keen in hearing from you on how you see this FSO FSP. What are some of the nuances that you can bring out for us?
Pretty chunky. So I would say FSO versus FSP is not an entirely new area of discussion for us. But given the market scenarios and portfolio consolidation, industry dynamics have shifted towards emphasizing on their pivotal role. At an overall level, sponsors have upped their FSP outsourcing, which is generally in the range of 40 to 45%, while FSO, I mean the full service model, is averaging around 25 to 30%. Interestingly, the split is fairly consistent for large and small size pharma. Also, from a value chain perspective, if you look at clinical labs and diagnostic services followed by patient recruitment, they're likely to experience increased areas of outsourcing in the coming years. Now, if you have to look at large versus SMB, patient recruitment and medical writing are the topmost activities and are followed across by clinical labs. But for SMB, clinical labs and diagnostic services are the most important, followed by a list of activities such as biostatistical analysis, RWR, and GT. So, net, I would say the point I would want to make is that CROs, be it specialists, or even IT BPOs, FSP model is increasingly trending now with significant focus on efficiency and on-time delivery in terms of which is fairly critical given a lot more focus on R&D and getting the drugs to market in a shorter time versus it has been earlier.
Thanks for that, Vandana. And I think if you're having difficulties in hearing Vandana, I think she's having some technical issues. So we'll try to sort that out. But yeah, do know that you can reach out to us, all three of us, including Vandana, if there are any specific questions that you want to ask us following this LinkedIn Live as well. Let's move to the next one. I wanted to deep dive a little, right? Which was Gen AI. And I think clearly the last year and a half has been mostly about Gen AI in terms of the conversations that we've had and the interest in interest generally from everyone to know how they should approach it, what they should do, wanting to know about what others are doing. And having said all of that, there's clearly been a lot of excitement. But if we look at what has happened as of today, uh, while there are a lot of promising use cases, most of them aren't moving to production. Right? We did an analysis towards the end of last year, which is decades in Gen AI terms, which said that around 90% of those use cases will never move to production. And generally, what we have learned this year is also very consistent with that. We aren't seeing a lot of use cases move to production. Sure, there are some which have moved to production. There are some where there has also been some value realization, but by and large, we've not seen them move to production. Nisarg, why do you think that is happening?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it, Chunky? But
Only million?
or a billion. Actually, it's $1 billion question, right? Yeah, that's right. But in my opinion, you're right, right? A lot of the generative AI POCs will. It's unlikely that they'll move to the production stage because of a few factors. One is uh, the overall availability of data is a challenge for the clinical domain, right? Pharmas are very protective about their R&D data, the clinical data, and therefore you can use a publicly available LLM to the extent where you're looking at data quality or data masking, some of the low-hanging use cases. But when it comes to use cases which really require domain nuance, protocol authoring, or uh, to some extent even the patient recruitment aspects, that's where a lot of the use cases might be expected to fail unless they have the right quality of data to be trained on. So that's one. The second is, in general, healthcare, life sciences, particularly life sciences, is risk averse. And therefore, almost every conversation is backed by or stopped by regulatory risk, data privacy risk, and security risks, right? So, what's the fear is, what's the potential impact if someone goes on to implement the recommendation or an output of a GenAI use case, and what's the chance that it impacts, a patient's life who's already, suffering and therefore participating in a clinical trial. So, in my opinion, those are the two biggest showstoppers at the moment: a lack of available data to train the algorithms, and lack of or limited trust in the output of generative AI use cases. I think there are a couple more, right? You can have thousands of use cases, but if you're not able to justify the ROI, Vandana brought up the point around ROI. We've seen this in the deal making activity, that productivity, ROI are dominating a lot of the deal making activity this year. So if you really are spending a lot in terms of compute costs, in terms of implementation costs for generative AI, and you're not able to see the outcome, which is, say, reduced amount of time in processing documents or lesser people working on a particular use case, then again it defeats the purpose of bringing in a transformative technology in your processes.
I think that's correct, Nisarg. And I think one good thing that I've seen uh, in the last 6 months is that because of all of the discussions on Gen AI, a lot of spend is actually flowing to data management, which is, I think, where more mature organizations are spending their like time and investment. And like, well, there are some use cases like summarization which have become popular, but there's still a lot of noise in the data. And I think that it will take its own time for it to produce the kind of results which I think people expect it to. But there are a lot of other use cases around using Gen AI for your data management and data operations. I think that is where a lot of value is, as well as knowledge management. Right? I think those are use cases uh, which again, where there is a lot of potential, and I think where some of the more mature organizations are already starting to realize some value. I think we are at the halfway mark, so let's I think pace it up a little bit. Nisarg, I'll come to you again. You've been again. You were at a CDM. You've been conducting a lot of assessments for product and platform providers. Uh, what do you see from them? Right, we talked a lot about challenges. What are they doing to navigate some of these challenges?
Yeah, for sure. So, in my opinion, the two biggest pain points which product providers are trying to solve for is offering pharma enterprises an easier environment to work with. So the UI UX is definitely seeing a lot more overhaul right now compared to say a couple of years before, right? And as you mentioned, most of these products, especially in the data and analytics space, are very recent, right? Maybe half a decade or so old. So they have been co-developed by or through partnerships with pharma and so on. So of course, initially the focus is on product finesse rather than UX, but then eventually UX does catch up. So I'm seeing that happen a lot more right now. In fact, even some of the traditional products like EDC, CTMS are seeing a makeover because there's a need for changing some of the ways of working or changing some of the functionality as they become more modernized in a way. So UX is definitely one. The other, which is not really product focused, but requires a lot more market making activity because of the onslaught of Gen AI, next gen analytics is change management. You cannot really discount change management or the impact which change management has in terms of getting executive buy-in as well as stakeholder buy-in in a new area. So you will see a lot more focus on change management right now, market education, educating stakeholders in terms of why you should be picking up a few products or what's the benefits of deploying it now versus later. But from a category standpoint, you will see, or at least as we discussed before, we're seeing a lot of innovation around some innovative areas like risk-based quality management. So offering farmers the ability to monitor risks more proactively, offering them higher data integrity and patient safety standards, right? So that's where you will see products maturing those capabilities. The second is, of course, DCTs were the talk of the town, 2, 3 years ago, but all of a sudden the shift is more towards hybrid trials. But at the same time, stakeholders realize that having a great or a robust ECOA product is absolutely important. So a lot of investments flowing into the ability of an ECOA product to handle the scale and the maturity across various therapy areas. That's another piece which seems to be happening. And finally, SMBs are seeing the recognition which they deserve. And by that, I mean you will see product providers, especially carving out a solution which is purpose built for them. So think about, say, even the large behemoths in this space like Medidata, Viva, right? They've launched a solution which is purpose built for the needs of SMB. For example, Rave Light, which was released just around a week ago, Viva Basics, which was released a few months ago, right? All aimed at catering to the needs of the SMB population, which is more simple, more nimble solutions for their needs, right? So that's the focus which I see from product providers, and like those are my 2 cents for now.
Yeah. So two more things I would touch on, right? One, you mentioned UI UX, and I think the part which is interesting is maybe 3, 4 years ago we did not see significant investments in UI UX from the incumbents. We saw it from the emerging players, particularly in DCT. Now we see that in ECOA, right? But we never saw the kind of investments in UI UX from the incumbents, and I think that
Yeah.
is one of the major changes that I am noticing, that even if someone has 40, 50% market share, uh, they are not just sitting on their laurels, but which they were 5 to 6 years ago. But they are now innovating. There are a lot more functionalities that they are launching. UI UX is a top priority for almost all of the incumbents. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the major shifts. The other thing that I'm also seeing, I think, is more maturity in terms of creating an ecosystem. So in 2024, we did see a lot of product providers, not the large ones like Aviva, Medidata, Oracle, but a lot of small to mid-sized product providers also setting up their own partnership network, SI partner network, and actually working with some of the largest service providers as a part of that. So I think that is also uh, that's also something that I've seen significant change, and I think that gives me more confidence that some of these product providers would scale faster in the next 1 or 2 years compared to what they've done before. So let's, I think,
Not
change
surprising,
track.
Chunky.
Yeah, yeah.
Not
Let's
surprising. I agree with that. Please go ahead.
No, okay, great. So let's change tracks. We've talked about 2024 a lot. Let's now talk about 2025. And maybe I'll set this up, Nisar, before I bring you in. I think generally when I look at 2025, I'm definitely seeing more optimism compared to before. So if you look at maybe let's take a step back as well. If you looked at growth in 2023 for the top pharma companies, you would have seen almost half of them growing and around half of them degrowing or showing negative growth. But we like recently did an analysis after the Q2 earnings of these enterprises, and almost I think all of the 10 except two, the rest of eight were showing positive growth. The two that were showing negative growth was only due to the fact that they had spun off a part of their business. So J&J did that for Kenvue, and there was another as well, right? So if you take that out, it means that generally across all of the large 10 companies, we were seeing positive growth. And in fact, they're doing better than what they have projected for the entire 2024. So I think it's clearly significantly better compared to 2023. And the other thing which I noticed is going through their earnings commentary, there was a lot more optimism. So the main common theme across all of them was optimism and the belief that 2025 is going to be much better. Pipelines are much stronger. So all the signs point towards the fact that 2025 could be or would be a better year compared to what we saw last year and what we'll end up with this year as well. Uh, it's not all rosy though. I think there are some segments which are going through, I would say, slightly difficult times. Particularly if you look at the SMB sector, if you look at biotechs, I think the ones which have promising late stage assets, I expect that they will continue to get funded. But those biotechs which have more early stage assets, I think that is where I'm not seeing funding activity significantly improve in the near to medium term, right? So I think there will be some stress there, and maybe that means more M&A from pharma, right? There hasn't been as much in the last 18 months as we have seen before. So clearly there's a lot of cash which is available to be spent. And maybe with some of the early stage biotech companies they may not have the same kind of access to funds. So that
Yeah.
could lead to more M&A activity. Uh, So that's, I think, largely what I'm seeing. And I think from the supply side, I also expect it to be more positive, given what we just discussed, that 2024, the growth, I think, particularly for services, while it was better than 2023, it's still not as good as what we had expected at the start of this year. Smaller deals, big pipelines, but slower conversions and smaller deals. Nizar, what has been your experience? What's your prediction for 2025?
So, I'm largely aligned, Chunky, on this, right? I've seen similar conversations. In fact, if I bring in some product provider perspectives, right, in terms of valuations, uh, around 2021, in the peak of the funding, we saw valuation multiples even touched say 20x, 18 to 20x, and so on. Right now, even if say there's a profitable startup which has shown healthy growth rates, that that multiple is still hovering around 11 to 13x, right? So it just shows how much the one is the difficulty of getting access to funding for a provider, and how much you mentioned, right? There'll still be a challenge given the overall macro environment and liquidity, which is still difficult to get hold of. But to your question around how will we see 2025 come out, um, I agree with you. There will, it's not, I expect growth in 2025. There will be pockets of activity which will be fueled by uh, the focus on productivity, data, or sponsor oversight of clinical trials, both for CROs as well as product providers. In fact, I was on a call today itself with a sponsor and a CRO, where the focus of the discussion was we want more ownership of our data, right? So, what are the data residency plans which we have set out for us, and so on and so forth, are actively being discussed now. So that means that some of those conversations will likely evolve. Those who are able to pivot to a an approach which is more sponsor focused will likely see more deal making activity, but pockets of growth will be similar to what we mentioned. So to focus on some next gen activities along with robust data management analytics, so as to enable sponsors to bubble up insights faster, get more value from data, and eventually focus on more long-term deals versus the short-term assignments, which may be one-off or where deal making activity won't really give you a boost in the long term. But what are your thoughts over here, Chan?
I think I agree with you. We've also seen, like, in terms of, I think, growth and funding activity, we have also seen some of these product providers get funded. I think these have been shorter rounds, which maybe takes them till middle of 2025, which is, I think, where I'm seeing most people think that funding activity might resume to the levels that we had seen before. Yeah, I think, as like you also mentioned, right, there are pockets of growth, but there are also certain areas where we do see not stress, but we do see some challenges in the near term.
Yeah, I think H1 of 2025 might still be a challenge, and depending on
Mhm.
how few macro environments or factors in the macro environment play out, right? We see potentially improving situation in H2, which means that both product providers, service providers should be set up for growth at least in the near term as well.
So, since you talked about growth, what is your recommendation to these providers? How should they plan for 2025, given that we are 2 months away? And as you mentioned, right, we do see an uptick, maybe a sharper uptick in H2. So, what should people do to prepare for 2025?
Sure. So, one is whatever is working for you, ensure that it stays or it continues to work for you even in 2025. So, your core, which is either on data management, analytics, specific product areas like EDC, CTMS, etc., right? It's important to ensure that the value proposition of those are accurately fleshed out. It's an increasingly competitive market. You will see a lot more nimble providers coming out trying to undercut you. But what remains really critical is focus on two things. One is exceptional account management and customer success. So ensuring that your client needs are heard faster rather than slower. And the second is a consistent focus to be your client's partner for success, which means you need to act as a strategic partner for your clients, help them either uncover some of the white spaces they need to solve for, or plug in the gaps proactively so that so that you're able to showcase transformational value to your clients. And then ultimately, where we're seeing the focus on, say, large pharma versus SMBs is definitely need for more nuanced pricing models, as well as outcome or pricing models which are more focused or tailored to the needs of SMB farmers. You cannot expect an SMB farmer to buy into an end-to-end or the entire suite of products or services which you have to offer, and at the same time you cannot expect a large pharma enterprise to do the same, but at the costs which are extremely through the roof. So getting the pricing right and ensuring that there's a consistent support throughout the process is important. And finally, what really happened in 2021, right, which was a phase of over promising and under delivering. I don't think that's happening right now, but in case there are nuances of that coming out, or if you're picking up on customers showcasing that dissatisfaction, then it's important to correct it sooner rather than later.
I think interesting points. There's one that I wanted to pick on where I think seen some new movement, but at the same time there's like a part of it where I haven't seen it change significantly. So if you look at some of the large incumbents, the main areas where they've played is phase two, phase three, and particularly in large and maybe some mid pharma. And as we had also discussed in the past, right, that 5, 6 years ago, we weren't seeing a lot of innovation come from some of the larger players. But that's something which
Yeah.
is changing now, more new functionalities, enhancements in UI, UX. And I think a link part to that is also looking at adjacent areas, right? So uh, thinking about how they can tap into the phase one and phase four uh, area where, again, some of their products which have been maybe too complex or too expensive for those areas. So I think there are things that I'm seeing which where they are also looking at what are the adjacencies that they can look at. What do clients really need from a product or a platform perspective, right? There's clearly not the need for the entire platform, but if it's
Yeah.
still a lighter version of the same platform, that is something that in theory would help them get not just phase two, phase three, but also phase one and phase four on the same platform. So I think that's
Yeah.
the positive, or that's a new thing that I've seen. Having said that, I haven't seen them do a similar thing for the SMB sector, right? Because in like it's while the requirements are not exactly the same as say phase one and phase four, but even for SMB, they want a platform which is more agile. They also want pricing which is different from large pharma, and I think that is one area where I've not seen a lot of incumbents innovate from a pricing perspective. It's the products are still expensive for the SMB sector. Well, the SMB
Mm.
sector wants to work with a lot of these large product vendors, but I don't think the kind of pricing models that are currently available support that. So I think that's what I'm seeing, right? In on the one hand, in phase one and phase four, I think incumbents are starting to figure out how they can tap into that market, uh, and makes more sense as well. They're already embedded in an account. It's easier to expand there than go after a lot of SMB accounts, which would be net new customers for them. So I think
Yeah.
this was one thing that I wanted to touch on. Nisarg, interested in your perspectives on this as well.
I 100% agree to that. In the sense, phase one or phase two, right? The early stage clinical trials, you could still it essentially points to scalability, right? How scalable is your product and how mature is your product when it's working with large sets of data. So if you are able to fine tune and build a product which is for scale, then this is definitely something which farmers would love to have. I think even from a CRO standpoint, right, Vandana mentioned a very good point earlier. The extent of domain expertise as well as nuances for therapeutic areas is, I think, while it was important before, it continues to remain amongst the top two or top three priorities for enterprises. We've seen enterprises look at specialists for areas like rare disease, oncology, right, where you require a lot more domain experts in the space and the ability for them to understand the pharma's requirement in a more nuanced manner. So that's also something which will help providers really take conversations to the final leg, in my opinion.
Yeah. And one other thing I would add is I think on support services, I'm increasingly seeing this become more important in our conversations with the buy side. Not that it hasn't been important before, but whenever we talk to buyers around how they look at what are the things they look at or what are the sourcing parameters they use, I think support services is something that I've consistently seen over the last 2 years become more of a priority than it was before, right?
Yeah.
And I think some of it is also that while in theory a lot of different products are getting integrated as a part of the platform, but in a lot of cases, not all, the support services are still there for individual products. Uh, and I think with some of these providers, I've seen a positive change. And I feel this might become, it will continue to become a bigger priority. So I think
Yeah.
for product providers, I think this would be one of the things that I would recommend them to focus on. Let's look at the questions. And maybe before that, one of the things I would also want to mention is as a complimentary offer for joining this LinkedIn Live. If you have any questions on clinical operations, you can reach out to either of us, uh, and we'll be happy to connect with you. Now let's look at there were some comments from Debbie. I think Vandana mostly asking about you. So Debbie, you can reach out to us if you want Vandana's thoughts. You can reach out to us uh, and have a conversation with her. I think the one question that we have from Sid that we can answer right now is around, can we briefly explain the context for pricing models? I think this was maybe to the point that I was making around SMB and the fact that the pricing models aren't really sustainable or don't really work for the SMB segment. So I'll add my thoughts, and so then I'll ask you to chime in as well. I think generally, again, what I've seen from a lot of the SMB sector is this: they want to work with a platform which is more agile. They maybe don't want all of the like they don't want the entire end-to-end product. They might want certain functionalities, and they want a pricing model where they can pay based on what they're using. They also want the level of complexity in some of these organizations is not is significantly less than what is there in a large pharma as well, right? So I think that's the context of pricing models. I've in my conversations with, interestingly, a lot of service providers as well, they've also been looking at how they can work with some of these large product providers to offer different pricing models for the SMB sector. So that was the context with which I mentioned that. Is there anything necessary you would add on top of that?
So I'll probably bring in a product provider point of view because that's where I'm seeing a large variation. So think about the large product providers like Medidata, Viva, Oracle, right? They may have pricing models which ideally have been carved out for large pharma. I think for small pharma, while they may be able to offer the same products at say like 60-70% of the price points which they offer to large pharma. The thing is the niche providers or the specialists are able to undercut them by almost 20% to 30% of the top like what they charge, right? So in this sense, right, they want to build a product, or they want to offer a product which might be suitable for the SMBs, but also the SMBs are able to see the value, not just for the end to end all the products bundled into it, but for the products or solutions which just the SMBs need, right? So stripping away non-essential features, looking at what can we offer them, and then offering the pricing models which are more in line with what the SMB product providers may be offering and what SMB farmers may be seeing. So that's also one reason for a lot of this innovation in this space. And again, goes to what Chunky was mentioning, pay as you go or outcome based models, or models which are built on value as well. Hope this answers the question though.
Yes, sir, there's one more question linked to pricing from Aman Bhatnagar. The pricing model can be incentive based as well as on the outcomes for the SMB industry. So maybe a question or a comment. Uh,
Yeah,
Anything
so
Nisar, you want to mention on this?
uh, aligns to what I just spoke before, right? Pay as you go, outcome based or incentive based models, wherein the outcome could be reduction in cost for the SMB pharma compared to traditional ways of working, or more productivity enhancements in a way, right? But the only challenge over here is if the real estate of the SMB pharma or a large pharma is already optimized, then there is a significant uphill challenge for these providers, right? So that's something which the industry or the provider ecosystem might need to work out, because more often than not the preference is still for the standard rates or the pricing per solutions or per study, rather than getting into outcome based engagements, which ideally could be pricey in the short term because of the high risk the providers are taking.
Thanks, Nisar. So I think we are almost out of time. I would just like to remind everyone who's joined in. First of all, thank you for joining in and asking your questions and sharing your point of view. Uh, Again, I would remind you that as a complimentary offer, you can reach out to one of us if there's a particular topic of interest within clinical where you want our perspectives. Please reach out to us. If you have a point of view on a particular thing or your prediction that you didn't hear, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you on that. And I think with that, it's a wrap. Thank you both, Nisarg and Vandana, for answering all of these questions. And I look forward to another LinkedIn Live with you, both of you.
Thank you, everyone.